Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. Well, today I've got a very special guest who's a survivor of the MK Ultra Monarch programs. We're going to be diving into occult families, those bloodlines, the abuse and breaking of the minds, and all this type of stuff that's now finally coming to the surface after years and years. So, welcome to the show, Gray.
Thank you for having me.
Do you want to give people a bit of your background and the story of kind of how you grew up and when you realized that all this was happening, and how we're going to get into how you escaped it and deprogramming and this type of thing. But yeah, give us a bit of the background.
Yeah, sure. I had a grandfather on my father's side who was 891st Air Engineer during World War II. He eventually got tapped to join the OSS during Project Paperclip when Nazi scientists and so on and so forth were being imported, to the U.S. and other areas. He eventually turned CIA. He got involved in these behavioral modification programs, is the kind of euphemistic way to refer to them, right? MK Ultra, other programs that are adjacent or that are derived from the research of the MK Ultra umbrella. Um, and essentially, from birth, had already been selected into an ongoing operation to where I went through this behavioral modification program. There's kind of a daytime, nighttime, kind of like a cover front persona. And then there's that main subconscious, whether there's multiple, several of them or not. There's kind of like an underlying, sub personality, right? That's kind of the operative, if you will. And in my early 20s, I found myself in a place at life to where during my daytime, I was trying to officially go into the service, into clandestine services. I was already also deep in the criminal underworld. And then essentially, I ended up finding out that I had been brainwashed in this program since birth. Everything came to a head, and there was a violent confrontation that ended up with me, almost dying, ending up in the hospital, ending up imprisoned, and falsely imprisoned, so on and so forth, and just a complete mess. But yeah.
You mentioned Operation Paperclip, but I think a lot of our audience is probably familiar now with those Nazi scientist programs to bring them into America. But a lot of people don't realize this happened in Australia, and it was called Operation Matchbox. And they brought dozens of the scientists here to Australia, to our institutions, universities, to do a lot of this mind control stuff. So it's prevalent all throughout the West, as you say. The other thing you hit on there is you were born into one of these families. So do you want to talk about how far back this kind of goes and their belief systems? Is this to do with the DNA, or is it just generational trauma where those people are more suggestible? Or, yeah, do you want to talk us through all that?
Right. So you have a few aspects, as far as like what's useful to the program, because just like with anything, there's certain people that will be more suitable, right? The main aspect, right, is dissociation, dissociative ability. It's kind of like a mental defense. That is a hereditary factor. Okay. So already that is something that's hereditary. For example, people hear about monarch. It's kind of like a multi-layered thing, but at the same time, on the real base level, monarch butterflies, their migratory pattern spans 5 generations approximately. Obviously, there's different migratory patterns, but just bear with me. So they pass off that epigenetic information to their offspring that goes on that migratory pattern, right? And that kind of like was adopted, into the monarch program. That's what it kind of reflects of. So that's a heavy aspect. Now, as far as how far back does this go? Well, MK Ultra and related kind of industrialized this, right? And kind of changed the nomenclature to more of like a scientific military intelligence, no nonsense, aspect. But the thing is that, it gets a little confusing, but, you can get confused or disagree based on semantics when really like there's a bunch of different ways to refer to the same thing. The bottom line is that the recipe, essentially the protocol, the step by step that they put people through that are in this program. A lot of it is just derived from a certain tribal religious culture that goes way back. And, a lot of these secret societies and orders take part in this, and this spans generations, this spans nations. This goes way back to the beginning of recorded history, to the, Egyptian mystery, to Babylonian blasphemy, right? To everything. It goes way back. There's some of the recipes even known in what's called the Egyptian Book of the Dead. There's just so many aspects of this, but it's also been attributed to what some know as the Luciferian culture. It's just certain step-by-step interruption of natural development, and then essentially like a hacking of it. You just put people through certain circumstances that alter their development at key points in development. It's interrupted, and there's a certain set of lessons or trauma stimuli, whatever, that they go through, and that will affect their development in a conducive way, to make a utilizable asset, right? In the Monarch and MK Ultra program. If you were in this occult terms, it would have someone under the spell. There's many ways to refer to this, but yeah, this goes back to the beginning of recorded history, and is kind of like a protocol that's been heavily guarded, especially by these age-old orders and secret societies.
Yeah, that's a fantastic explanation, and it's really important for people to understand those lineages and how far this goes back. And a lot of people now are starting to come to terms and hear about all these royal families throughout Europe that have kind of inbred some degree and all intermarried to keep those bloodlines. But then, as you say, there's even these lineages now we can trace back to, and some of these royals brag about being related to Egyptian pharaohs or whatever, and then through to Babylon and all this type of thing, as you say. And I think these societies never really died. They kind of just turned over into the next chapter, and they kept that occult knowledge, as you're talking about. So do you think these occult secret societies, once you get to the top levels of, Freemasonry, Mormonism, it's kind of all got the same similar dark elements to this occult knowledge that they keep, while the lower levels are pretty unaware?
Oh yeah, I don't think I know for 100% fact. If you get to the top of many aspects, whether it be Mormons, whether it be Scientology, whether it be Jehovah's Witnesses, whether it be Catholicism, whether it be anything, you get to the top of the upper echelon there in military intelligence. There's a lot of military fraternal orders. We get into politics again. You got people probably know of the American Skull and Bones, I think is real infamous. Some of these just hidden on some of these more known, but you better believe that there's also lesser known or not known at all. But yes, this is all based on societies that have overriding and underlying loyalty, and then send their members into different strategic locations to unite access and unite powers. Here in the United States, the way our government works is based on a trilateral separation of powers. We have our executive, our judicial, and our legislative government, right, that are made to be separate so a power is not abused. But what these orders, what these, whatever you want to call them, what these clubs, what these groups do is they send their members into each one, and then within their own club, they unite those powers, and kind of, push forward their agenda. And since the powers are separated elsewhere, the kind of like commoner good person that's not trying to abuse power, is just going through, right? Doesn't think any better of it, while these people are strategically carrying out, an age-old agenda. So yeah, there's absolutely, these things link up, and you'll notice once you get to the top of these things, these people that are in these clubs, that are in these orders, that are in these cults, whatever you want to call them, it's the same. It's the same. Again, like even with the religions, you have different religions, but if you get to the very top, the controllers that are exploiting the infrastructure and exploiting the loyalty of their subordinates that do not have all of that information, they all kind of think and act the same, right? And they follow the same guidelines. But again, most of these people at the lower tiers of the pyramid, they're not aware of this knowledge that's at the very top. And a lot of them are just blindly loyal and don't know any better. They're being used. The infrastructure, again, and the membership is being exploited at the top tiers by, these people that are corrupt, I call them bloodthirsty, money hungry power mongers. You can call them many things, pedo cultists,
Yeah, yeah.
whatever you want to call them.
We might get back into sort of who's really running the world and New World Order, the direction they want to go in a bit later on. But I want to rewind to what you said about the programming. So, more and more people waking up to these horrific things that they're doing to kids. And as you say, to get their mind to dissociate and fracture as that protective mechanism. And then you can have multiple, what they call dissociative identity disorders and that type of thing now. So, do you want to maybe just talk as as much as you want in detail or whatever about how these kind of programs work and the ages that it's happened, and then when they start to use you as an asset, kind of how it all develops?
Right. So there's multiple programs. There are some to where like the bloodliners, right, and these people that are really part of these family dynasties and kind of the shakers and movers, right? They tend to go through this since birth. They raise themselves like this. This is their religion. This is their culture. This is how they raise themselves. They know that they can't raise their young, spoiled, right, with an easy life, because they would never be able to continue the dynasty. They would never be able to make the hard decisions. They have to desensitize them. They have to harden them. They have to condition them from the very beginning. But there's also programs on an industrial scale through like education and through just different global mechanisms, right? Here in the U.S., obviously, is where I am, so I'll refer to some like we have the National Defense Education Act, which just basically ensures the framework and the funding. So, our young we can siphon off certain ones to go into national defense, right? To stay competitive on a world stage, right? So there are programs through that to where they'll identify children to put in this, and some of them might not be there since birth, right? But either way, it starts very young, absolutely before 8. There's a certain stage in the brain development where it's a lot easier to damage and there's less adaptability, right? But essentially, the brain in children are already born disintegrated. And then, as the brain forms, there's different stages of development and it all, goes into a whole. What happens is they use trauma and weird stimuli and kind of expound on already like natural features and like attachments and bonds that you'll have with your parents, different just phases of development and things that you'll kind of go through. They interrupt that, but then also kind of like it's essentially like hacking it, right? In order to fit and program to their whim, which essentially is usually a split personality, a split compartment, an alter ego, an alter identity, just a state where someone is completely compliant, loyal, subordinate to their handlers, right? They use weird trauma, all sorts of different stimuli in order to elicit this mental defense condition, dissociation, that happens on a spectrum, right? And then they'll also attach access codes or triggers, post hypnotic suggestions in order to essentially call that up when it needs to be utilized, right? It gets pretty deep. But yeah, essentially they use trauma and stimuli to interrupt the development process, create an altered state, a hypnotized state, if you will, that they can command and control. There's a bunch of different ways to refer to it. But again, depending on if it's from birth or if it's from a certain age, ideally, if you have a child from birth that they know is going to be in this program, they start conditioning early on with trauma. And the trauma, whether they're a child or whether they're older, whether they're a baby or whether they're a child, they'll have certain trauma. At the same time, there'll be a certain color room or a certain color that the person eliciting that trauma has on. There might be shapes and symbols. Like this starts with even pre-linguistic. It doesn't all even go into linguistics because it's all about certain parts of the brain and the subconscious automatically registering it. And then basically, if the same sort of thing happens and that same color, that same symbol all comes up simultaneously, that will kind of elicit that same place and they'll go back to it in their head. Just like people will smell something, and that's known to really trigger, right, a memory. It's that sort of thing. There's just like, there's certain stimuli they take advantage and layer up to all the senses to where you'll see something, you'll see a color, you'll hear a certain sound frequency, you'll see colors even on a frequency, they'll try to align that. There'll be certain symbols, and then they just line everything up to make, a stacked condition that will elicit that alter persona that, And,
Yeah.
that's basically how it goes. So they pair trauma also with triggers. So there's a method to the madness, right? They're making it so they can call it up, and so it's useful from day one. It's a very intelligent design, if you will.
Yeah, that spectrum's important as well to understand for people at home. So I think what you're saying is they can do a specific program to make someone, maybe an assassin that gets triggered by keywords, as you say, in future, or there might be someone that's used for blackmail or delivering messages to people, but all the way through to the MK Ultra that's infiltrated Hollywood and media, as you say, where everyone to some degree is under this kind of spell of mind control from everything that's been pushed through us through our screens and that propaganda over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And a lot of what's done to these subjects that become like Manchurian candidates, if you will, right? And that level of programming, a lot of that's like the direct. But some of these techniques are also being used on a wider scale, a little bit more passively to the populace as well. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's just really taking like natural phenomena and the way that just brains work and the psyche works, and then expounding on that and just taking it to the max, to extremes, right, on a spectrum.
Yeah. So how widespread do you think this program is these days? Because I mean, there's been a few people saying there's lots of these Manchurian candidates and sleeper cells that we're starting to see activated that might be responsible for some of these global events that are happening recently. So sort of how do you see all that?
It's incredibly widespread. I know this for 100% fact because over the past decade, I've specifically had an organization that networks with not only survivors and insiders and defectors, because not everybody that survived this actually ended up going into utilization and ended up going into certain aspects, right? Like there's a lot of research and development, and then sometimes the whole process doesn't work, right? But anyway, so I've been networking with survivors, defectors, but also specialists and therapists, because a lot of these people end up surfacing with trauma therapists or just ordinary therapists and then get routed to trauma therapists eventually. So we've been getting just a lot of data on the program, a lot. And I will tell you that it's incredibly widespread. There is different levels, just, again, a spectrum. There are some people that are very lightly programmed and just lightly routed to areas and this and that. You have some people that are completely a Manchurian candidate and think that they are in charge of making their own decisions. They may be a politician, but everything they're doing is dictated from post-hypnotic suggestions and altered personas that are knowingly working subsurfacely to control that person's actions. Like there's incredibly advanced methods that are truly frightening at the top level of this. And the program has a top-down approach. The people that get the most intense programming are the people that govern the most or have the biggest influence. We have, for example, I've shown the number one American podcast for military-aged males. I've shown that they currently are in the middle of a monarch mind control scandal. I call it Monarch Mockingbird because you may have heard of Mockingbird, the kind of media control, right? So someone like that will get an incredible amount of programming to ensure that they're dictating this, just like politicians, just like people, generals, perhaps, or someone at the top of military intelligence that's responsible for a lot. And then as you get lower down to the commoner, they may get some passive programming, but not near as much, right? But as far as for example, like mass shooters and stuff like this, there's a large percentage of them that I am confident in saying 100% were MK Ultra. There's telltale signs. There's just if you know. I mean, I could pull up on honestly the better half at least, and that's mildly stating it. I could pull up things, their old history, their connections, that just scream MK Ultra. It's just truly terrifying and depressing that this is not. It just shows the state of our media and the state of ignorance that people are in, because with publicly available information you can look at this and just really see it. Of course you can't say 100% when you're not an insider like that, but just with publicly available information, and then with a proper deep dive into say these people's social media history, these people's schooling, where they went specifically, if they were in therapy, if they were in this or that. Like, I mean, there's tons of self-admissions of being in this program, and it's just incredible that this hasn't came out more. But I mean, that's why we're here, and I appreciate you having me on to air this and get into it.
Yeah, it can't ever get out if they've controlled all the media. But now through the internet and podcasts and stuff, it's sort of hit this critical mass where it's acceptable to talk about. It's allowed on a lot of platforms now, so it's awesome that people are waking up to all of this. And as you mentioned, it kind of explains why so many politicians are just emotionless and have these kind of psychopathic tendencies, and they look like they're not even there when they're doing these things to destroy their own countries. And people think, how can they be doing that? But then all the way through to those shooters, as you say, and it's not always them actually doing the shooting. Often it can just be programming them to be the patsy. And, we hear these testimonies where they say, I can't remember that, or I wasn't there, and it all ties together, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So do you want to dive into a little bit about, do you think the DNA, 23andMe, Ancestry.com, these collection services of the DNA and ancestry, does that all tie into finding more people for these programs, or do you think that's not really that important? And yeah.
I mean, they have it down pretty much. I think by the time someone gets into 23andMe, like, don't get me wrong, there might be like some adults that get flagged and then they get watched for if they have offspring and stuff like that. Anybody, generally people entered in the program are adolescents or children or babies, right? So it might be a little bit late if they're showing up in the database. But I wouldn't trust 23andMe. Like, here's the thing is, no matter what, you're given the easiest access for this. Yes, they have different ways. Yes, they're already identified a lot of these families, a lot of this lineage, right, through DNA markers, through genetic markers that are, conducive to this programming and stuff. But still, 23andMe, like, I mean, that's just handing it over to them, and then also legally giving them permission, right? Because these people will do it without permission, but anywhere they can dot their I's and cross their T's, they're happy to do so as well. So I wouldn't say that like necessarily 23andMe is going to put you super more at risk or your children at risk for this sort of thing, but it could add to it. But either way, it's one of those things, and who doesn't want to like know that information from it, right? Like, it's definitely interesting too. But it's definitely giving permissions to untrustworthy parties, and there is concerns. I think that's legitimate. I don't think that it's super risky as it pertains to these programs per se.
So let's change gears a bit about escaping these programs and these families and the deprogramming side of it. So, I've watched some amazing interviews with Kathy O'Brien, Jay Parker, these other people. Is it sort of counselling with a face-to-face counsellor? Like, what are the other methods and things that you need to go through to truly deprogram and undo everything that's been done to these children and that type of thing in the program?
Yeah. So, I mean, unfortunately, the greater percent of people that go through this haven't even started to recover because they are not self-aware. Here's the thing is, I mean, to go and seek help, generally you need to be self-aware. Some people end up going just to a therapist because something is wrong, and then they eventually find out that they're part of the program because it surfaces there. So that is a thing as well. But here's what it is at the bottom line. These things are ran by fear. Obviously, there's fear, scared. There's certain personality types to where there's certain things that will control them more. Some people are really responsive and kept in check from fear. Say, hey, these people, they have to believe that, they have got to keep this in. They can't let this trauma out. They have to stay loyal and obey no matter what, because they believe that they or the ones they love will essentially be killed or lose their quality of life to a certain degree. And given the power of some of these groups doing it, that's a realistic thing. That's why a lot of people are very responsive to, kind of like faith-based healing in this, because like sometimes you just have to turn it over and trust a higher power, because you as a lone self, like it's a mountain, right? Like it's a lot. It's a lot to deal with. The other is guilt, right? A lot of people are controlled by guilt because they were forced to do bad things in double binds. For example, a lot of people, a lot of children, they don't want to partake in this. And they say, hey, sometimes they'll start it off for like a little animal, like a puppy or a kitten. And they'll say, hey, you have to do this to one of them. If you don't do it to one of them, we're going to do it to two of them. You say, no, I can't. Then they do it to two of them. You say, oh my God, if I just done it to one of them, it wouldn't have happened to two of them, right? And they'll keep on, keep on.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of that in the base conditioning, double binds, right? A lot of trolley problems, if you're familiar with that. And they kind of like build that sort of mentality in and just desensitize while you're going through that, right? So a lot of people are controlled by guilt and blackmail. And I guess guilt goes hand in hand with blackmail because they say, hey, if you don't go along with this, we're going to post this all over social media. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Everybody will know you're a monster, and just things like this. So generally, in order to overcome this, you have got to face the worst of the worst. Unfortunately, there's also aspect that you have to relive some of the trauma from what you went through, because sometimes it's embedded so deeply. What happens is when you're going through this trauma, it short circuits the amygdala and right straight to the hippocampus, I believe it is. So instead of kind of going to the standard part of your brain that holds the memory, it essentially writes to the nervous system. And, that's where it holds its power. It's all just like if you accidentally slam your finger in like the car door for the next month when you're going to your car, you might like, whoop, let me take it slow, right?
Yeah.
Just like kind of a natural thing. Well, it's like that sort of situation, but it expounds on it. So like anything that comes up remotely to, when you're in that traumatized state and they give specific instructions, you learn a specific lesson, you'll be like, whoop, even if you don't consciously remember it, deep down, a part of you does. The body keeps the score. It's a famous saying in a book, right? By someone renowned in the field. So yeah, it's just you have got to face. Sometimes you have to face the horrible pain and kind of like being willing to relive it and then revisit that situation with your childlike state and then bringing adult wisdom to it to finally process it and then release its power over you. You might have to face the fear, might have to face the shame and the guilt, and there's different aspects like this. So it can be very, very hard, especially people that are successful, like, whether you have like these Hollywood moguls, right? These actors, these actresses, whether you have a high up politicians, scientists at the top of their trade, with that ego, and when you have everything in your life and like you're the man, you're the woman, whatever, it can be very hard to realistically take yourself down and level to that base level and drop that ego and really be introspective, honestly introspective, right? So there's a few aspects of it, and I'm going on here. I could continue, but it's just essentially dealing with how your strings are getting pulled, and that's horrible pain and trauma that's deeply embedded. That's fear, that's shame and guilt, and those are the main mechanisms. There is more to it than that, but obviously, other than facing that by yourself and meditative introspection and just being realistic, there is specialists and modalities and long-term therapy that's going to be very conducive to that, although therapy is a minefield as well, just because there is people in that field to purposely sabotage survivors, since this is such a large program.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on plant medicines helping healing? People using mushrooms, ayahuasca, ibogaine, that type of thing to heal their traumas. Have you heard stories where that type of thing helps as well, or not a fan?
Oh, no, greatly. Yeah. I mean, here's the thing is, and a lot of what I say may be controversial. Here's the deal is I've dealt personally with hundreds of people. I've reviewed thousands of cases. I've been case working individuals for the past decade, and at the same time networking with specialists and therapists in the field. So, I have a pretty, well-rounded knowledge on this, and I'm not speaking from my own bias. The facts are the facts. I have my own preferences, but let me tell you what's going on with it. By far and large with the people. So here's the deal is, yes, there are some beneficial aspects to marijuana, to cannabis, okay? And they can kind of like take that main wall down between someone's front and their back to their, they call it their system, right? It can kind of lower that wall. So that can help. But also, depending if you're not like planning to work on it and stuff, it can also lower that wall slightly and get someone in a traumatic state and then get them in what's known as a strange loop. Strange loop is a psychological mechanism to where they're basically going in a loop, a cycle, and going nowhere, right? So, you have to be ready to work on yourself and do it like, yes, they can be conducive if you're doing them specifically to work and then working in a therapeutic process, with purpose, right? It's different between taking something. I don't care what people do recreationally, but it's different between doing something recreationally or habitually and doing something specifically medicinally with a purpose, right?
Yeah.
So anyways, but the downside, one is that there's been a lot of testing done, and there is a certain frequency kind of state that a lot of marijuana cannabis will put you in, and that's sort of frequency. There's specific programming done nowadays to counteract that. The other thing is that marijuana cannabis kind of stops you from dreaming. Now, a large part of the programming is done in what's known as the N3 somnambulistic state. And what that's like a deep delta somnambulism, N3 sleep cycle, that's sleepwalking, essentially. So a lot of this programming is done to where certain things, kind of like system maintenance, kind of like if you run defrag on your computer or you run something on your computer, a lot of that is automatically done during your sleep cycle, and that's programmed in, and that's like one of the like heavy anchors of this. So marijuana cannabis can kind of make it hard to where you can for you to address that aspect, which is kind of like the deep down catch all. If you're doing work during the day, it can undo it during the night. Like, this is a serious, there's like, you got, unfortunately, with the advanced state this is in, you have to think of it like a computer, and programs are running at night to make sure the systems are stable, even if you're undoing them during the day, so it can't interrupt that. Now, when you get to psychedelics and all that, it's a double-edged sword because they are used for programming too. Yes, psychedelics, especially things like ibogaine, will give you basically like a life review to where, you can really face the trauma and stuff like this. If it's going to be really hard if people aren't in a safe place, if they don't have funds to support themselves, not worry about work, and like be able to go through it and have some downtime where they're just stabilized, it's going to greatly destabilize you. It's going to cause an emotional upheaval and wild turbulence, and it also can re-traumatize. So it's going to be widely dependent on the people if they're ready for it. And I personally, all in all, don't recommend it. If it's an emergency, you could take this and you could probably get some of your memories back. But getting your memories back doesn't mean you're healed. Are you going to be able to deal with that reality? It is a lot to face. It is a lot to deal with, and it's a complete paradigm shifting because, certain things from your day-to-day, things are going to feel like they're not mattering near as much. It'll also feel like imminent, like serious stuff's happening. All the threats will come to the surface. Everything you've dealt with, you will relive it in flashbacks, and it is just an insane amount. So really, there's no substitute with taking it step by step and journaling, dealing with proper trauma therapy modalities, and approaching this from a grounded place, getting stable, making sure that you're in a safe place with financial support so you can continue and do the work. Because when this stuff comes up, you better be ready for some downtime and some lack of functionality. So yes, they can be utilized, but there is downsides to, yes, these substances as well. So it's just important to know where you're at, what your plan is, what the capabilities are, what your situation is, and look at it realistically and act accordingly.
Fantastic. So where do you think this is all going? So the purpose of these programs is obviously control. But does this all tie into the New World Order and these occult families, as you said, that have gone back forever? What do you think the purpose and the goal of all of this is?
Yeah, so here's the thing is too, because here's one thing is you have bloodline families and essentially the people ruling the world, right? So it's important to know that they put themselves in this. There's two main aspects to this. One is behavioral modification, to where this affects like your behavior, right? And that's also equated to mind control, right? So it's essentially making a split personality that they can access with triggers, and whether it be a spy, whether it be a sex slave, whatever it be, right? So on the other aspect too is enhanced development. Okay, because like when you break someone down to their subconscious, especially someone highly suggestible, you can elicit certain phenomena. You can get, for example, like a chimpanzee, right, that has a similar, similar weight to a human. They're way stronger. It's because basically they don't have the same amount of gray matter in the brain, and they don't have the same fine-tuned motor function, but they have a lot more power, right? Because those neurons, impulses fire more just straight direct to the muscles, right? So you can do things like hypnotize someone and have them bypass some of their gray matter, for example. and they could squeeze something so hard it might even break their own fingers, right? And then obviously that there's good aspects to that, and then if you take it too far and they hurt themselves, that's not good. But you can elicit just ridiculous photographic memory, right? You can do just all sorts of things. There's certain phenomena that can be elicited from this, and there's certain development that can be enhanced further than that would be naturally occurring in this day and age in this culture, right? So there's some aspects to this. Also, like, you have your different tiers to where, like, on foster children, on prisoners, things like this, there'll be heavy research and development that might be damaging, but they're testing things. This ties in with eugenics. They're testing things, and then, like, if they come up with a new technique that's very beneficial, these bloodline families will then use it on themselves in the future generations, right? So you got to realize they do it to themselves, not necessarily to put themselves under mind control, but they do also put their own families under mind control to make sure that they act accordingly until they get to a certain age, and then they have a rite of passage to where they join willingly, right? There's things like that. So these people are also doing that for their own religion, for their own culture, to themselves. So it's important to know that. Now, as far as where this is going, like to where this is done on the populace outside of these bloodline ruling families, what they're doing is the passive ways that they do this stuff to the whole populace. It's the capabilities are expanding, right? And they're becoming more capable with hands-off with technology. Obviously, there's technology on the computer and the satellite and the ground tower ends, but less technology that has to be in their person. So they're expanding their capabilities without apparatus so they can control the populace. But on these direct subjects, whether it be politicians, whether it be generals in the military, whether it be the biggest influencers and podcasters, right? Where's this going? Yes, it's going towards a new world order. It's going towards the elimination of the middle class. What they want is they want a master class and a slave class, and they want people to, be efficient. They want people to own nothing and be happy, right? They don't want to have to fight and force every single person to do what they want. They want people to be compliant and happy little worker bees. They want to be worker ants, and they want to serve the queen. That's essentially what it's at. What are we facing imminent? I will say this: there's sleeper cells all over the world. It's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. But yes, there are sleeper cells all over the world. This is tied up, for example, in America with what's known as continuity of government, to where if there's a major disaster, that essentially they can like drop the Constitution and drop all the laws and just have ultimate control, right? And bring the military in to kind of like, do this. They can round up dissidents and imprison anybody that's not going with the narrative. They can do all this. So yeah, there's sleeper cells all over the world. Where is this going? It's going towards complete world domination. It's going towards a new world order, one world nation, which really is already in effect on the back end. It's just not forward facing the public to where it's openly acknowledged. But this new world, one world order is already in effect. It's just, they're just rolling it out now publicly. And that's where this is going. It's just they're ever tightening their control while they're constantly doing research and development for new ways for enhanced development that then the ruling bodies do on themselves while they do the harshest research and development on the test subjects.
Yeah, a lot easier to implement all this with digital IDs that UK have spoken about. Australia's bringing it in for social media and everything in December. So once they can sort of stop you from being able to work or buy food with this digital ID, a lot easier to enslave everyone, isn't it?
Very easy, very easy. And they get people reliant on it as well. It's not like they just spring this. They stair-step people, they desensitize people, get people reliant, and then boom, right? The walls are definitely closing in for sure.
How important do you think people really understand, the Epstein network and, Trump coming out and saying there's no Epstein list where he'd said he was going to release it and all that type of thing. But how important do you think it is for people to understand, because this ties to Prince Andrew, Jimmy Savile, Bill Gates on the island, the Clintons, like it just sort of exposes all the big pillars of power and those connections in that network, doesn't it? So what are your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, I mean, well, here are my thoughts on it. Like, there's several Epsteins, right? I mean, that was definitely a large player, but it's funny because you look at the Epstein too, and you see what was he into? He was into eugenics. He was into this genetic development and this breeding. He was into, the cutting edge science. He was also into these sex slaves. He was also into intelligence operations and blackmail, right? But again, it's lesser known, but if you go looking at the survivor testimony and these people involved with this, you notice, like, just like the butterfly trust and this and that, a lot of these people were being programmed. It's not just VIPs getting their rocks off, right? Some of these VIPs, when they come and meet and use one of these assets, they're actually trauma bonding to elicit Stockholm syndrome and perhaps embed a new command. And just like if you buy a personal and property protection canine that's trained to executive level protection, you have to meet with the trainer, and then you get the commands and you learn and you bond back with the dog because it's been raised by someone else, and then you are officially the owner. It's the same thing too. A lot of these are actually people that are handing off assets, just like certain people get their wives handed to them. Certain people just have, buy people as modern day slaves. That's what a lot of this is about. Of course, it's always simultaneously training. Some people are being sent in and you say, okay, I'm going to hand off this asset to this person, but also I have this underlying personality that responds to this code, and now have underlying access, and they're my mole into their network. There's all sorts of espionage, double agents, triple agents. It goes super deep. But it's very important to know that, like, here's what's going on. Is Epstein is a perfect example. One thing, it goes so deep. People say, oh, was he Mossad? Was he this? Was he that? Well, all the intelligence agencies are linked. But here's one thing is that there was, some human trafficking scandals in Yugoslavia. And at the same time, what was going on is there was a organization called DynCorp, in Centurion Aviation. And these are State Department, CIA known companies, right? No fronts. And what was happening was Epstein, his Bell helicopter, was known to use cloned tail numbers. That means they had the same exact tail numbers as this DynCorp aircraft and these Centurion aviation aircraft. They're known to be on counterinsurgency operations, right? And things like this. And again, at the same time as in Yugoslavia. And then, one of Jeffrey Epstein's main girls was Yugoslavian. She became the pilot, was procuring for her. And it just, you kind of see the way that this works. But yeah, so he was tied in at the very top. It's just not just about sex slaves. It's not just about blackmail. It's not just about, advancing eugenics, advancing breeding, advancing cutting edge science. This is about assets. This is about building up modern day sleeper spies and then essentially peddling them to world VIPs. So it's very important that people understand practically how this was working and why it's getting covered up. It's not just about the pedos. It's not just about that aspect. It actually ties in to national security, but not national security that can be justified, national security that is absolutely corrupt to where, these main players on the world stage are misusing once children put through these programs to become espionage assets. This is what it is. This is the dirty underbelly, to where they are controlling the trafficking trade from the top down, and they're controlling these industries from the top down, including scientists in certain in certain lines of work. But yeah, it's again, it goes into breeding, it goes into genetics, it goes into finance, it goes into espionage, because that's the one thing they send in everywhere to every industry so they can commandeer it and have their way. So yeah, it's very important, but at the same time, this long-winded answer. At the same time, it's very important that people don't get hyper-focused on it and waste time. Look, we get it. We know if you can't affect change, let's move on and focus on other things. Be careful where you pay attention. Be careful where you spend your time, because if you can't make a change in your focus and your time and attention is not going to make a difference, move on to the next thing. You can't always drain all your time on the current thing. We have to choose to where we pay our attention, to where we spend our time, and to where we aim our focus.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that now with, like Palantir and all this, everything going fully digital, that the likes of, you said Epstein's just one player, whether it's Diddy or anyone else, do you think that's becoming less relevant now, where they've basically got everything you've ever done digitally to now blackmail people and that sort of thing?
Yes, there's definitely an aspect of that, and that's one thing is, a lot of the game that's being played is we're currently porting over to a technological aspect to where the Epstein and Diddy thing. Don't get me wrong, not that we're really getting the whole story or real justice, but I strongly believe that they are being offered as sacrificial lambs to minimally tick boxes to satiate a demographic that would otherwise kind of insist more, right? That would come and say, hey, no, we're not doing this. We have to address this. They're presenting this as a sacrificial lamb to usher in the new age and act like, hey, no, we're taking down the bad guys. No more of this. So, of course, if they can get away from manual crimes that can be directly linked to persons, and now they can do this remote technology that's hands off. Of course, they're going to control her like that. It's easier. It takes less manpower. In a lot of ways, it's more predictable and more reliable. So, yes, we are headed towards a more technological age, and they are attempting to minimally tick boxes, and make themselves look like the good guys that are cleaning up the mess from these sickos, right?
Yeah.
So that's what we're in the middle of. But the important thing to note is that it's the same players behind the scenes that are still calling the shots. Nothing's changed. All they're
Yeah.
doing is they're ping ponging between the left and right. They're just it's just they use proxies. They use controlled opposition. The shakers and movers, the ruler of this world, they don't just play one side, they play both sides. Because if you don't play both sides, there's always going to be a portion of people that are lost, that don't get with you. So if you're really trying to govern, if you're really trying to control these people and maintain power, you're going to control both sides. So every once in a while, they present one side as the bad guys. They act like they clean it up and then usher in the new guys. Guess what? After a while, we'll get disillusioned with them and they'll bring in the other guys again. And it's rinse and repeat, just like the left and the right in the US that's been going on forever. People get sick of one side, they bring in another. They get sick of one side, they'll bring in another. Guess what? Then they switch the values of the sides. They just do whatever. But yeah, that's what we're dealing with 100%, whether it be Planeteer, whether it be other things that people don't know the name of. The technological aspects, there's been heavy research and development, and that is it's operational, it's reliable, and it's being fully implemented. So it's important now more than ever the people that have been through these programs that they're listened to. Because if we don't listen to them and then pursue the real power players that they can name, it's only going to get much harder for people to name the power players and the culprits because they won't have direct contact with them due to the nature of how these things are carried out nowadays.
You mentioned Epstein's duplicate tail numbers on aircraft and stuff. You're familiar with Ghislaine Maxwell's Terror project with submarines and stuff I think she was doing to transport people around some of those islands. So is all this stuff happening sort of underground? And, what are your thoughts on these deep underground military bunkers and below the Vatican or government buildings? Is all this stuff kind of happening underground, out of sight, out of mind for the public? And have you ever been to some of those or, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, there's definitely an underground aspect, and I mean, especially there's aspects to where everything's monitored at this point. When you go underground, you can really escape some of the frequencies that are blanketing the surface level, right? That are hard to escape. Underground, right? People aren't getting service; they're not getting reception. It's just really cut off, right? It's a lot more private, especially if there's tunnels. You can pop up one place, pop up the other, to where even satellite tracking is hard to get it, right? Yes, I mean, there's a lot that's carried out underground. It's very secure, and that's where some of the cutting edge, state of the art stuff goes on. I mean, it's no secret. Yeah, that's what's going on. Yes, I have minimal experience myself with some of these underground facilities here in the U.S. I mean, you can find much on documentation. But yes, there is a network of deep underground military bases, and that they're even connected, and they have maglev trains or whatever you want to call them between them and other modalities. Yes, this is very real. If you dig into it, you can, verify much of it. Just if you see what you can verify and just think about what you can't verify, right? I mean, it's obviously going to be more than they just have readily available, considering it gets into classified, areas. But yeah, I mean, that's a reality for sure, and it's worldwide phenomena, right? I mean, that's where some of the most secure facilities are. They're underground.
Yeah. So if we want to get into some of the darker stuff, warning for people at home, you spoke about the ancient bloodlines all the way back to Babylon, where human sacrifice and all that was widely known, and it's even known that continued through the royal families up until relatively recently. So I think you probably agree that it never really stopped. It's just gone underground. But what are the, belief systems of these people, these different religions and cults that, Satanism, Lucifer, whatever it is, Baal, that they're sort of worshipping? What are your thoughts on why they're really doing that at the tippy top? Do you think they're actually contacting entities, or they just think it's giving them power? Or what are your thoughts on how all that really dark stuff works and why it's important to them?
My personal thoughts, from my experience, is that yes, these people at the very top, they commune with primarily non-physical presenting entities, and
Yeah.
they take orders from them. And that these non-physical presenting, I say non-physical presenting, meaning that through rituals and ceremonies that they have direct communication, they have direct contact with them. Um, Many modalities, many protocols of communication, but far and wide, what I'll talk on here, what I'll speak on here would be Enochian, John Dee, who was, an aide to Queen Elizabeth. I'm not sure which one, but Queen Elizabeth, for example, was credited to start the Enochian alphabet and the Enochian system, with his associate Edward Kelly. Um, Now, this is just a system with its own alphabet, with its own this, with rituals, with you got crystal balls, you have magical circles and all sorts of apparatus, and they go through different things, let me explain it to you, I guess, as they do. It's kind of like a cosmic fisherman. You take a certain lure and you craft, just like fishermen will make a certain lure to get a certain type of fish, and they might use this bug, or they might use this twine, and they might use this little thing in it. They will take a certain scent, right? A certain sort of frankincense or this or that, right? They'll take a certain color, which again, a color can be a frequency, and they'll take a certain sound or hymn, and again, that will be a certain frequency. They like to line up these frequencies, right? Then they'll take a certain act. They'll take a certain this, they'll take a certain that. And there are things out there, we see only a narrow band of the spectrum, right? We see this much of a spectrum. We can only see what we see. There is so much more out there. And even things that we could technically see, like parasites that can get in our body, can get in our gut biome, can get in our brain, that actually control behavior. Just like, it's been shown that like cats can get completely controlled from parasites.
Toxoplasmosis. Yeah.
Lizards even, yes, exactly. So essentially, they craft a specific set of stimuli, what you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you touch, what you taste, and they use that to lure, to attract something that's out there. Okay. And then at the same time, they have primarily people that they start from young, that have been desensitized to go through these mystical experiences, whether they're given DMT, whether they're put through traumatic experiences. You hear some people that have like an experience with something, whether it be phenomena, whether it be UAP phenomena or a spiritual experience or something, and it rocks their world for life, right? Well, the thing is, if you get a child from young and start putting them through this on purpose, eventually they get be able to deal with it a little bit more, a little bit realistically. They get desensitized to it. So there are certain protocols that you can put people through, and you can summon, you can invoke, you can evoke, you can elicit certain reproducible phenomena to where they do specific rituals, specific ceremonies under specific set of circumstances, specific protocols, and they can get in contact with the same things. These things have demonstrated intelligence, and they have demonstrated the ability to predict the future. They have been demonstrating many abilities. And what happens is they essentially, just like John Dee, who again was the aide to Queen Elizabeth, who is known as the original 007, by the way. That's how he signed his things. They start talking to them, and they quickly get control because they are much farther, more comprehensively intelligent than the human species. And these things will start, putting things through tests and trials because they want loyalty, and they want to say, well, okay, we're just going to give you this information. We're just going to give you this power, how do we know you deserve it? And just like, with John Dee, and again, this is Enochian magic. Aleister Crowley adopted this. Then you see like things quickly develop into moral debauchery because kind of they put people through tests like, okay, y'all have to do this, y'all have to do that. What happened with John Dee and Edward Kelly is they wanted them to wife swap. That was their loyalty test, right? So it kind of like just desensitized people to where like nothing matters and you go against all the instincts and all the grain just to desensitize yourself, which like frees yourself, right, to more free thought, to where you're not inhibited by typical human values and boundaries, right? Essentially is this: they use protocols that are reproducible to speak, to commune with specific entities who they worship, who they follow, who they, become parasitically infested with. They willingly engage to the part where they get infected. They get infected with this energetic virus. They get infested with these parasites, with these demonic parasites, whatever you want to call them, demonic or not, whatever you want to call it. There is a parasitic infection. There's a parasitic infestation. There is an energetic infection, okay, that these people go through. And, are they reptilian? Does the reptilian part of the brain over generations develop more and get used more? Whatever you want to say, whatever it is, these people through time and time and through generations, spanning generations and going way back, they have routinely engaged with these things. They've routinely communed with these things and are working hand in hand with them, but not just working hand in hand with them. They're doing their bidding and they're getting used like playthings. Okay. There are intelligences out there, period. And I rebuke it. I denounce it. I'm disgusted by it, but I want to tell you that it is no joke. And if you go through this and you experience it, it unfortunately, it can stimulate parts of your brain to where you get a feeling for it, and it's more than any drug could do. It's more than any standard life experience could do for you. They essentially tap in that part of your brain and turn the volume all the way up, whether it's a parasite and it goes in there and just stimulates it, whether it's an outside energetic force that somehow has its way and, hits the frequency, and it will get you hooked. Okay. You get a taste, you get a feel for the real power. And once you experience it, you know that these other people are hooked and it's terrifying. But yeah, they're communing with spirits and it's, it's an open secret. So yeah,
every culture throughout history has had, knowledge or spoken about good and bad spirits and whatever. It's only really in this modern age where people have sort of turned away from spirituality. I think it's making a bit of a comeback now as more and more people wake up to the child trafficking, satanic ritual abuse, all this occult stuff. I think it naturally people go, well, the opposite must be true. So what are your thoughts about, the opposite? Because I think we're seeing, even this Charlie Kirk thing seems to be this rise of Christianity again, but I believe that most modern religions have all kind of been hijacked and subverted to some degree from their true original spiritual teachings and that type of thing. So what are your thoughts on that, good versus the bad ones? Do they exist? And spirituality, how does that all tie together?
Yeah, I mean, I believe that, that yes, there is forces out there. I mean, this is an infinite universe. I believe that there is non-physical entities, that there is physical entities, that there's some physical entities that can also communicate non-physically, right, for spanning distances, and all this. And I believe there's a balance. I believe that some of these more negative, more malicious, more of these non-benign forces are kind of quicker to interject and involve themselves with human affairs here on Earth. And I believe that a lot of these people and these ruling bloodlines and parties that be right now, these that they are more dealing with these negative entities, if you will, and whether it be neutral or negative entities, that they are taking power and attempting to control them, but also just following orders, and just working against the greater good of the commoner, of common humanity. But yes, I do believe there are different forces. Me, myself, even throughout this, I think the turning point in my life was probably when there was a communication ritual, the defining moment of my life, to where there was supposed to be communication with some of these negative entities, and there was positive communication with something that showed me something entirely different, and just essentially changed my life, and showed me the good, and that's when I started to really rebuke everything. Yeah, there's absolutely positive entities.
Yeah.
But they get a little bit less involved directly.
Mm.
And we can't rely on them, right? We have to make the right decisions for ourselves. But yes, I believe it's an infinite universe, and there's a myriad of entities, of forms of consciousness, with their own agendas, right?
Yeah, yeah. Um, that's fantastic summary, and this kind of just really has tied everything together today so well, mate. So I'm absolutely loving this. But I guess the next question is, how do we stop this? And the meme's been going around. How long will 350 million Americans keep listening to 350 bad people? Do we have to just stop complying and realizing that we have the power, or what's I believe that knowledge, you can't change it if you don't realize that this is going on. And that's why we do these podcasts and interviews. But yeah, what are your thoughts about how we fix all this?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so one aspect is like, obviously the powers that be, the humans, right? Because here's the primary thing: is we're here, we have to deal with the front line, which is humans, right? And definitely the controlling humans here, what they do, they seed division, and they make sure that instead of the commoner seeing our real oppressors that's oppressing us all and ruling us all, and getting the bulk of everything and giving us the shavings, they make it so you see your neighbor as the enemy, right?
Yeah,
So one thing is, we all have to take a breath and be realistic. It's hard because the day to day is a constant struggle. And, we're looking at our next door neighbor, like we're in competition with them. It's a rat race, right? So we all have to kind of get out of that mindset and unite. Unfortunately, yes, there is a unification, right? We all have to be realistic about it. I'm a strong believer that, yes, some of the aspect, the truth about the people that govern the world, the people that rule the world, if you will, some of these corrupt aspects, some of these negative aspects, whether it be the predominant religion, Luciferians, whether it be the other aspects, that has to be outed and has to become common knowledge. The whole Manchurian candidates, the whole sleeper cell, the whole behavioral modification, the whole brainwashing on the micro and the macro scale has to come out, to where it's like, hey, of course, these people are ruling the world. They're willing to do anything. And, essentially just through education, and, they're brainwashing the populace as much as they can, but they're also directly brainwashing people that have the most influence. And that, these people are not for y'all, they're for themselves. And they're trying to essentially create a master class and a slave class, right? And that sort of thing. And more people are seeing it, right? So that's definitely one aspect. It's just basically becoming aware of what reality really is. As unfortunate as it is, right? People have cognitive dissonance, and that's a cliche term, but it's true because it's uncomfortable truth. It's an unfortunate truth. When you really know what's going on with reality, it hurts because you've probably hated your neighbor for almost no reason, right? I mean, you've probably wasted a lot of the time. You probably believed in a system that was ultimately corrupt at the base of it. It hurts because you've been fooled, you've been tricked, you've even aggressed in certain ways that perhaps weren't necessary. And it's just a large pill to swallow. It also hurts because you might not be able to affect the amount of change that you want, and that's devastating. If you see a bad situation and you can't fix it and you just want to help, that's hard. That's hard to deal with on the day to day. And still, the day to day doesn't get any easier because we all have bills to pay. We all have a family to support, right? So, yeah, but it's really just spreading knowledge, and communicating with each other and finding a way to unite instead of fight. That's it. And then, also obviously on the direct scale, as far as like how to get the serious, dirty aspects of the truth related to the program, I started the Organized Safety Initiative, which I can get into, but I won't go that spiel unless if That's
Yeah,
what they're
no, I
doing.
do want to get into that. So my understanding is basically you created a platform where other victims can come forward and enter their details, but in a private, identified kind of way. And so you can start to put the pieces together, go, hold on, all these people in this region said they've been abused by this person and they don't know each other, and you're keeping their data private for their protection. So amazing system. Is that right?
Yes, mostly. So here's the deal with it: is it's not about their information because we've been doing this for over a decade, right? When I came out of the program, it wasn't just me. I was also assisted by people that since before in the mid 90s, they were helping people get free. The type of people that even through their associates, like Kathy O'Brien, for example, was helped to get free from the program, right? So Mark Phillips wasn't the only person that in that line of work that was helping people get free. I was helped out of the program as well with people doing this that became disillusioned since the mid 90s, right? So at this point, they've been going for 3 decades, and some of them even at this point has passed, but there's still some of them that were younger that are still living. Me, for the last decade since I came out of the program, what I have been doing is, again, networking with survivors, with insiders, with defectors, with specialists, with therapists, and people in the know for this, right? And we used to directly network and get survivors direct information and all this, but we changed this over time. Now what we do is, and we just went public, okay, but what we were doing privately and now what we're doing publicly is we have a system to where you can anonymously submit information, and the platform is encrypted end to end, okay, so as safe as possible. I'm not saying that technology isn't available to hack all this, but as far as we have exercise due diligence, and this is as safe as possible. So you can anonymously submit persons of interest, locations of interest, and make general reports of interest. And then what you can do is you can opt in to be notified if your information is corroborated. So that means, say, if you name a certain person, if you put a certain location in, if you name a specific program that's not publicized, right? Because this is what it's all about, is sharing information that's not public. That holds a lot of weight. Anybody can say, hey, the Clintons. It's like, okay, don't get me wrong, it may be true, but it's one thing to name the Clintons. It's another thing if a bunch of people name a non-public party, right? That's a culprit. So you can opt in to be notified if your information is cooperated. If you name someone, a place, a program, and other people did, then what will happen is, through an organized safety liaison, we will vet the people, talk to them, and then eventually see if the people want to talk together. But the thing is, in the meantime, we're learning about the network, we're building up our understanding and mapping out everything, and just using that for investigative and pursuant purposes. But as well as that is, we can build up a blind preponderance of evidence. Here in the U.S., you got blind preponderance of evidence, which is a certain evidential standard for civil lawsuits. And then we can build up the burden of proof, which is the evidence standard for criminal prosecution. So what happens is when people don't know each other, but they're naming the same culprits or the same locations, and that's all matching up, then we document that, and then eventually they can talk, and then we can bring it forward publicly or just directly through law enforcement or whatever the situation calls for and whatever the people decide on, right? But they can build it up preemptively instead of just reporting getting shot down, and then you hear other people reported and they got shot down. It's basically about building up blind cooperation behind the scenes, and our system flagging that, and then us notifying people to see if they want to get together and network, right? So that's what we've been doing for over a decade, and it has beyond made waves in the background. And there's only, unfortunately, they do drop in national security, and there's only been so much that we've been able to pursue on the legal aspect. But as far as briefing key players to show them the reality of this and show them these cases, we have had astounding results. And there is definitely a lot of light being shined on these places. And it's been very effective, essentially. So now we're getting to the place where we've been launched publicly, an organized safety organizesafety.org, and you can go there for person of interest, location of interest, general report of interest, or also if you want to, click help organize safety. And if you have some talent or otherwise are able to help organize safety, just contact us through that. And now we're looking at getting hooked up through sexual assault centers. We're, looking to get hooked up with other key players where people report to where they may not want to report through certain channels. They may not have had success, and just where they have an alternative that's as soft and as non-pressure and as safe as possible. Okay. And the other aspect is that, when we have certain people say, there'll be hot spots is what we call them at certain programming locations. Say it came down to like a mega church or something. Then what we can do is we can look where that mega church is, and then we can perform outreach to where we reach out to everybody and say, hey, there's been some people that name some stuff. If you also have had an experience here, click on this QR code and you can submit information anonymously. So it's not just that we passively are intaking information. We can also actively target hotspots that we know this is going on at to where this would otherwise go unreported. Because even 10 years ago, what we were doing was certain daycares and certain early child development centers to where this program was taking place. Once we found out that it was part of the system, we were using anonymous email addresses and acting like parents that had kids in there and saying, hey, my child went through something here. I'm a bit concerned. Have y'all been through anything similar? And then we're using that to proactively reach out and then find cases. So, we can actually proactively face this. And there's a very real way where it's hands off, no direct confrontation, but we can address this. So we're just getting very creative and have made this as safe as possible system to address this. So again, that's organizesafety.org. And if we have anybody that's been an insider, a survivor, a defector, whatever, you can go and report a person of interest, a location of interest, a general report of interest, or if you would like to somehow assist the team and help organize safety, organizesafety.org. You can opt in for notification if your report is corroborated. You can opt in to answer further questions if you don't mind being contacted for follow-up. And you can obviously just choose to get a copy of your report as well. So organizesafety.org. Thank you.
Awesome. Final question. You mentioned daycare centers. We've had a bit of news come out in Australia recently about there was one person that had abused hundreds of kids and they had to get tested for STDs and stuff. But in Australia in the 90s, a lot of this came to a bit of a head with the Wood Royal Commission connecting police, judges, the church, all this type of thing, running these pedo networks. And there was even a big 60-minute special about satanic ritual abuse in Australia. So did you ever get transported to Australia? Have you got victims on your platform from Australia? Or should we just think that this is pretty common everywhere throughout the West, really, or all over the world?
No, absolutely. I've heard of several Australian cases. There's a lot. We've got a lot of reports from Pine Gap. I'm sure you've heard of over there. And I don't know if you know Fiona Barnett. She's named a lot of places out there. Yes, Australia is a hotspot. New Zealand, there's a lot there too. This is worldwide. I believe Australia is part of Five Eyes, right? And there's a lot of even American presence. Like it's not just strictly American, but there is definitely a heavy push from the U.S. I think that's kind of like one of the main proxies that the controllers behind the scenes use. So there's a lot of collaboration with that. And that's obviously what I most know about and specialize in. But yes, tons of reports from Australia. That's one of the most reports we get outside of the U.S., which obviously our focus here in the U.S. is the U.S. But yeah, unfortunately, this is prominent there, as well as worldwide. But there's definitely in general, that's one of the hot spots in the world, unfortunately.
Well, I'll put all the links to follow Gray, socials, and your platform, everything down below. But any final thoughts for people at home? Anything we haven't touched on? Anything's really important?
No, I appreciate y'all. Here's the thing is, again, organizesafety.org if you'd like to make a report. If you'd like to see, my wife, Emma Catherine, has a podcast, the Imagination Podcast, and she has well over 200 individual survivors, defectors, insiders of this that give testimony at length, as well as some specialists and therapists even on the platform. So if you'd like to kind of go hear at length testimony, that's one of the foremost resources for that. I would highly recommend that. Again, she's on X, Twitter. She's, has a Substack. And then, obviously she's on Rumble and YouTube, Emma Catherine, the Imagination podcast. So people can hear for themselves and they can see where the dots connect. Again, organizedsafety.org if you have a direct report. And I would say this. I mean, organized safety, we have already built up what we call packages, to where we have tons of corroborating evidence, to where we have testimony from several people that didn't know each other that named the same thing, right? And we have put that into essentially a folder of packages, what we call it, to where we have, the crimes committed, and then to go along with it legally, we kind of have like the statutes, the legal codes that they broke, that were violated, and then supplementary evidence and so on and so forth. We already have tons to present, and we have witnesses that are willing to go forward, and we let them know when we're showing it to new parties and things like that. So if you really want to help, it doesn't cost any money. It doesn't cost anything. You can come in, for example, on X and Twitter, and what you can do is, and we're going to start naming exact ones to make a coordinated push. We just have to collectively, as people, push certain bureaucrats, right? Certain politicians, certain large social media accounts, and the largest podcasters, and say, hey, this MK Ultra monarch is an issue. These Manchurian candidates are an issue. We have essentially proof of this. We have corroborating testimony, supplemental evidence that we're having trouble getting out. Please air this. Please address this. So all we need is collectively to get a lot of people to press up on the right places in order to hand these packages off. Instead of just doing this in the background, then like you see with the Epstein case, if we don't have any public pressure, you see with the Epstein case, they'll say, oh, well, we don't have any evidence. Oh, we don't have this. We don't have that. So essentially what we're using is the public to gain attention and ensure that these people have to make a public acceptance and say, okay, we will look into this. And then also we will use the public as a watchdog. We will use specific people as a watchdog group that will say, okay, we are handing off this evidentiary package. That way, if anything happens to the witnesses, right, it's going to look real bad after these people publicly acknowledged. And at the same time, they cannot deny receiving this evidence. They cannot deny what's in the evidence, because we will have the public eyes on them. So it's unfortunately got to this point where it's that bad. We have got to get the public pressure to leverage not only the attention of the proper channels, but also to safeguard with the eyes on it, to say, yes, you did receive this evidence, and yes, we are watching to make sure nothing happens to these people. So that's really, that's really what we ask. All we need is public attention. We already have the rest put together. It's been an extreme struggle. It's very hard for people to step forward, because they are not risking their own lives, they're risking their families' lives and their quality of life. If we can get some public eyes on this, it will help greatly, to where there is less individual risk and more people are willing to step forward together. We have some very high profile witnesses with just astounding testimony and evidence, whether it be celebrities, which we have several of, whether it be top scientists at the top aerospace companies. We have people in military intelligence. We have politicians. But what they need is a conducive situation to where they're not just risking everything in vain. So we know if we get enough people to look at this, just the same amount of people that care about the top football game going on, right, that care about the new movie, whatever, if we get these people to say, hey, we have some evidence, we have some witnesses, we have this issue that needs to be addressed, and then we can get this publicly known with the eyes on it, we can make this change. We have everything but the public attention. So please unite, spread the word, and let's get this done.
Yeah, you're doing amazing work, mate. I really hope more people wake up to this. Guys, share this video around. Leave a comment with your thoughts on anything we've touched on today. And we'll have to have you on again in future, Gray. But good luck with everything you're doing, mate. It's amazing.
Thank you greatly.
Cheers, guys.